everybody kind of knows this. I have to confess that I hadn't thought of the scale of this. So let me quote here. The second, and this is WSWS.org that I'm quoting from. The second factor was the slower growth in the working age population due to a combination of, now I'm quoting back to Powell, quote, plunge in net immigration. Wait, what? I thought we had open borders.
Yeah.
I thought everybody was coming in. Net immigration is going down under Biden.
But what about the Great Replacement?
Okay, none of that is true. None of that is true. Here's the head of the Federal Reserve saying the problem is we don't have enough immigrants. Okay, so that's point one in the second factor here. And then he says, plunge in net immigration and a surge in deaths during the pandemic, probably accounting for 1.5 million missing workers. So many people died during COVID that's part of the reason why we have a labor shortage, because they died. Meanwhile, the Republicans are like, who cares about masks and vaccines? Everybody get back in the assembly lines, and oops, you got to drove them back to the assembly lines. A lot of them caught COVID because you told them not to take precautions. They died, and now you're missing 1.5 million workers. Okay, so that's what's actually happening. And by the way, guys, the quotes that I read are direct quotes from Powell. I'm not the one saying it, he's the one saying it.
Yeah.
But they say it in gobbledygook so that, and the reporters are all part of this. Again, they're not evil. They're just used to the groupthink of, well, of course, the problem is wages. And I haven't seen anybody report about how corporate profits are at a record and it's outrageous and it's contributing to inflation. Find me an op-ed that says that. Maybe they'll let one progressive on out of like hundreds and hundreds of op-eds written saying, no, it's the goddamn workers, it's the workers' problem, it's the wages are too high. That's because it's not, mainstream media is corporate media. They're multi-billion-dollar corporations themselves, and where do they get all their money? Two sources. Other multi-billion-dollar corporations that do ads and the corruption in politics. Politicians give them $17 billion every election. They did in the last midterm, and to cover up the corruption, and that's where all of the money goes.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of like a very small scale version of the political and economic reorganization and chaos that followed like the Black Plague. Like how you had like the system of government, the organization of the economy in European countries fundamentally changed because so many people had died in such a short period of time, and the balance of power between classes changed as a result of it. Obviously, this is a much smaller percentage, but when you combine that with the immigration changes and other things, we're seeing, I think, a version of it. Anyway, as you pointed out, yeah, the profits are out of control. US Commerce Department's Bureau of Economic Analysis reported non-financial sector corporate profits of $2.08 trillion during the third quarter. That's up from $1.9 trillion through the same period last year. Yeah, second quarter profits, 2.07 trillion. Now that may seem high, but it's important to note that is not high enough for them to ever lower prices, literally ever. And by the way, when it comes to price gouging, it is crazy that Biden and other politicians aren't using this, the quote I'm about to read you, as the rationale for some sort of bill to stop the corporate price gouging, some sort of windfall profits tax. This is Darren Woods, CEO of ExxonMobil, who said, I'm optimistic that with time, the market, and we've proven this, I think, over the years, that the markets will come back into balance. But it is a function of time. I think in the short term, everyone will squeeze what they can. And the financial chief of PepsiCo said on his own company's third quarter earnings call that his company is, quote, capable of taking whatever pricing we need.
And those are not the only two. We've read other quotes from other corporations earlier, where almost all of them, because they have they have to be honest in their earnings call, otherwise they could be sued. And two, they like to brag in their earnings call about how much money they're making, so the executives can get higher bonuses. So they go on there and they're like, because of inflation, we've used it as an excuse to drive up prices and nobody's stopping us, right? And so almost every executive is bragging to no end about how they're taking advantage of inflation.
Yep.
And because there is no government left. Guys, last thing, to give you a sense of how unbelievable the corporate profits are. So just 3 years ago in 2019, the third quarter profits were 1.37 trillion. Let's round up and call it 1.4. It's gonna make easy math. And John just told you This year was 2.08 trillion. So let's round that up to 2.1, right? So 1.4 and 2.1 in just 3 years. That's a 50% increase in profits, and that was already a record. A 50%. Guys, from the business world, a 50% increase in profits is not a little. It's gigantic.
Yep.
In just 3 years. Gee, I wonder what's driving up prices. And yet, the only one saying it is Bernie Sanders and the Justice Democrats.
Yeah.
And every other Democrat in Washington is covering corporate ass when they could have won the elections, by the way. If they talked about price gouging, exit polls indicated that price gouging made voters furious. And of the voters that were concerned about inflation, that in the elections voted mainly against Democrats, if they had tackled price gouging, most of those guys said they hate price gouging. They would have loved an attack against price gouging by corporations and big business. They could have easily kept the House, but they serve their corporate donors, and the mainstream media, corporate media, keeps that from you religiously. So you never know that the Democrats are just the good cop and the good cop, bad cop game the corporations play to screw you over.